You're listening to Design Atlas Season 3.
When was the last time you opened Google Maps on your phone, used an onboard GPS in your car, or explained to a friend the directions to get from one location to the next? Whether you were aware of it or not, we wouldn't have GPS if it wasn't for the brilliant science being done aboard the International Space Station. Maps are everywhere, helping humans navigate the world. They also represent a form of universal design adopted and understood within many cultures and countries.
It's intimidating and you have to be on your A game. And they come at me with these questions and I'm just like, well, I always want to have an answer for them. But I'm also the first person to be like, you know what? I probably could have done it this way. And sometimes we have a discussion about it and things change. And I'm like, I'm not ever, nothing is sacred with me. I am always happy to change it. I just want it to be the best thing for the users and I want it to test well.
That's Rachael Feinman, a senior user experience designer who's worked for both the Google Maps geodiscovery features as well as more recently the merchant experience embedded within Maps and Search. Her love of design began at an early age.
Yeah, so I kind of knew I wanted to be a graphic designer at a young age, which is quite odd, especially given the fact I was born in the 90s and I feel like it wasn't a super well-defined career path. But I knew that I really liked some form of design. I was always quite creative. I was very into art as a kid, but I didn't really know what that looked like as far as a career sense. But I started looking into what graphic design meant probably at the age of around 15 and 16 when I started to kind of understand what I wanted to do, majoring in school. And then I found that graphic design is a thing that I could do and it is something I could study. And I was really excited about that. So I actually went to the University of San Francisco for 1 year and was studying graphic design. And that was an interesting school because it was a bit more art focused. So I was doing everything from they called it like computer design back in the day. And we didn't have UX at the time, but, and then, everything from illustration, art, a lot of art history, a lot of art theory, painting, stuff like that, which was really great because I was already quite creative and really kind of loved that as like a base for the understanding of why you make design or art decisions. And then I ended up transferring to University of Arizona, which is just because I kind of wanted a different scenery, and they have a really great Bachelor of Fine Arts program. And so I transferred into their graphic design program and studied that for following 3 years. And in that time, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I was finding out that I was definitely pretty decent at this design thing. So I started working, moved back to California. I'm from San Diego originally, moved to Los Angeles, which is kind of where the work and, a lot of the jobs were. Started a job at Disney as a production artist, which was not creative and not exactly what I wanted to do. But I was like, you get your first job and you're like, it's in my field. Like I've done it, I'm not working at a random place. So yeah, that was really, really exciting. And then from there, my career kind of oddly progressed in different ways. I started doing more like marketing design and found myself as like a branding/marketing designer in like the e-commerce space. I worked at a few different jobs in Los Angeles. And this was at the time where we didn't really understand what like user experience design was becoming kind of its own path. And I really was frustrated by the fact that everything was subjective. Like I would make a design decision and I would have art directors come in and be like, change that because I said so. And I really hated that. I'm a very kind of analytical person. And I was just like, I want data to like be able to support these design decisions. And I realized that's very much of what user experience designers do. I ended up kind of following that path. I applied for this program, which is through an agency called Huge, and they do a 10-week user experience design crash course, and you kind of learn everything about user experience from the people that are working there. You learn about working with clients, and that was really my gateway into the agency world. And so I worked at agencies for a long time, and I really loved that because I loved the ability to work on so many different projects, so many different clients. I got to be a part of the rebranding for like Hulu TV and got to do things with like Morgan Stanley. So there was so many different areas I got to focus on and kind of worked my way into the product house experience that way. But yeah, it was such an interesting journey that I was so surprised by, starting out as like someone who just really liked to paint or, draw. And then all of a sudden I'm a user experience designer at Google, and I'm kind of like, how did this happen? I think I got lucky as well with kind of where the trend of careers were going with the design field.
After her various roles and jobs, she decided it was time to level up her career. After applying to Google, she heard back and began one of the most difficult interview processes she's ever taken in her life.
Oh man, I could talk about the Google interview process for days. It takes days too. So I think about it with my parents actually, because my mom is a teacher and she's very creative. And then my dad has a PhD and he's a therapist. And so I felt like I was always very much like 50-50 left brain and right brain, and I was really good at math, and I liked math, and I liked problem solving. Like algebra was oddly one of my favorite subjects because it was very much, I know, it's so strange. I'm surprising myself by that. But I was so confused because I was like, I really love, like, I'm very artistic. I was in choir. I played piano. Like, I was so on that side of the brain, very creative. But then I also really loved like math and problem solving. And I really feel like I found myself in this sweet spot where I'm able to do both, where I like have a very strong creative side. And I think a lot of my job, when I'm not able to be creative, I actually need to find other outlets. Like I need to go spend the weekend at the museum, or I need to go paint in my free time, or I need to go make music. Like I need to do something that still fulfills those if I'm not getting that from my day job. But I feel like I was doing so much graphic design and I was really missing kind of the data, like I said, behind why we were making those decisions. And I started working with a few different agencies. And the one that actually kind of sealed the deal for me was when I worked at an agency called Us2. They asked if I would go be a part of the embedded team at Airbnb in San Francisco. So I lived in New York at the time, and I flew out to San Francisco, and I spent 6 months like embedded in a team inside the team. And it was really amazing learning experience. And I realized like the amount of impact you get to have and the control you get to have designing in-house versus as a client, at an agency, you're really, at the hands of what the client wants, and you're making design decisions based on kind of what those requirements are. And you're not getting the full picture of like, what is the journey that we're trying to solve? Like, what are the needs? What are the user needs? What are the market data? Like all the stuff you get to learn about when you're in-house. I realized, oh my God, this is like so exciting that I get access to all this information and the research and the market data. And that was kind of my gateway in, as I was working at Airbnb when I had a recruiter at Google approach me. And I had actually been approached by Google before, and I'd started the interview process, and I didn't get it. And I was heartbroken because it's such a rigorous interview process, and you get halfway through it, and then the worst part is, the most frustrating part is that you don't get any feedback. You go through this whole process and they're just like, I'm so sorry, it's not going to work out. Have a good day. Like that is literally, and I'm like, can I have any point of feedback as to what I can improve upon, And they're just like, no, we're not allowed to tell you. And I'm like, okay. So that was really frustrating. So when I got approached a second time, I actually said, no, thanks. I was like, I don't really have time for this. Like the interview process is like a full-time job. Like it's like, I think I spent 25 hours on the entire preparation before the actual process began, because at the time you had to complete a design challenge. So that, and Google has gotten a lot of feedback around how it can be biased, because people obviously that aren't working at the time and are interviewing at Google are able to spend more time on it, right? Versus people that are working in a full-time job. I was, working around the clock trying to make this design challenge work. And so luckily, I'm happy to say that they've just removed the design challenge like this year, which is great, because I think it's really unfair. It's you already do so much, and then to also have to go into this the whole separate challenge and then to present your work and all that. So even without that, you have interview conversations with people, and then you have an on-site, which is about 8 hours. And that is just a grill situation. And you're meeting people rapid fire, and then you go on a lunch break, but your lunch break is also an interview. So it's just really intense. I remember the day I did it, I came home and I just laid on the bed and I couldn't even speak. I was so mentally drained. You're talking for 8 hours and you're having to constantly use your brain. And I remember my now husband came in and he just asked me, he like turns on the lights and he's like, how was it? And I was like, talk to me tomorrow. Like I couldn't. I was like, I'm done for the day. But it's very intense. And then you think, well, could I possibly actually get this? You want it so bad. It's so hard to get. And then you get it and you get in and you have crazy imposter syndrome and everyone's telling you this is normal. And you're working with the smartest people ever. And I've learned so much in just the 3 years that I've worked there, because I'm truly working with people that, one, care so unbelievably deeply. Like you see these people that just want truly the best experience and the best product for everyone. And then they are just so intelligent. And I feel like an imposter because I come from this state school. I was studying art. I'm like, what am I doing here? I'm here with like people from Harvard. So it's definitely, but you feel like, but I worked really hard to get in here. And I think that's the respect everyone has for what we call nooglers, because that there's no way to cheat your way into the system. Like you got to be good. So you get in and you're feeling good.
One of the most interesting things we've learned from Rachael is that Google sends teams of people to various regions of the world to understand the culture, the people, their need for navigation, and the overall research to facilitate the product experience of Google Maps, and all we have come to know within Google Maps experiences in our mobile devices.
So everything is based on market research. So like we have researchers that literally go to these new markets that Google wants to invest in, and they get on the ground and they talk to people. Like I was lucky enough to go on one of our research trips because I was new, and it was kind of like, hey, do you want to go to Mexico City and learn about kind of this new market we're investing in? And I was like, absolutely. So I got to go and I worked really close with the researchers, and we literally spent that entire week doing a bunch of different things. One, just going out and exploring the culture. So that was obviously quite fun. And we had kind of like pod leaders. You get broken up into pods, and we would actually hire locals to come and like give us a tour of a market or a tour of this famous place and really talk to us about the culture and help us understand a bit more of how these users are different. And then we went also to people's houses and we interviewed them. And we literally just asked them, how do you use Google Maps? And, so like really on the ground, kind of nothing fancy, just really talking to users. And I think that's something that Google will always do. And that's something they really, really focus on, is making sure that we're building the best thing for our users. And it's what people want. Like everything we design is based on what we hear from our users, and we get feedback from our users. And that is literally how we create our initiatives. We don't want to build things that people don't want to use, and we want to meet people where they are. We don't want to build new apps and new tools and new features that they then have to go download another thing, find another, access to another thing. We want to bring it closer to what they're already doing. So I think that's kind of how I'm sure they found out about this project, was like they went to India or wherever they ended up launching this project, and they were talking to people and they were like, yeah, I don't feel safe walking home. And Google Maps only gives me the route that's the fastest, and it's not always the safest. And then ding, 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 a Googler's like, well, I think we should work on this. And that's really, I think that's really amazing, because Google, Googlers really kind of push for these initiatives. And that's why I feel like we do so many great projects, because the people really care.
Coming from an agency world, Rachael was used to wearing so many different hats and being in so many different roles to push a product out into the world.
And then you come into a place like Google and they're like, no, we have someone for that. And you're just like, great. So you get to learn. Yeah, you get to learn very quickly. So, I work with a quantitative researcher who has a PhD in decision making. So that's just incredible. I was like, where do I even begin with how awesome that is? So I work with quant researchers. I work with qualitative researchers, which run most of our UXR studies. And and research studies, and they really test the actual product and help us do kind of initial concepting. And then I work with UX engineers, which is, I've never worked with before. They're awesome. They basically are so incredible and know all about kind of our user journeys, and they're very user focused, but they have front-end building capabilities, which is awesome. And then I've worked with some that are really, really accessibility focused. So we have actually like a guy on our team that's, his whole initiative is really around accessibility. And he's taught me so much about how to design for a screen reader, how to design for someone who's partially impaired, all these different accessibility needs, how to create the right green lines and specs for him to build this product. So UX engineers, we work with UX writers. And again, they're slightly different than content strategists, but they are way more understanding of kind of how, they help me with like the culture understanding and the right wording that we should be using, and making sure we're using positive affirmations versus negative. So thinking about like, don't do this, but like you could do this. So just the way we write and the way we talk to the user is so important. So I work very closely with UX writers. And then, so I'm a user experience designer, but I also work with visual designers. And sometimes in the past I've seen, I think a lot of the world today's, we call them product designers. And that's kind of what I was, having a visual design background. I was a bit of both. But it's really nice now knowing that like, yes, I can lean on that visual design side, but the visual designer on our team really helps with the, like thinking about all the different components in our design library and making sure that everything is compliant with that design surface, because we have one design language for Google search and we have another for Google Maps, and they're different. They're different, stylings, they're different fonts, they're different buttons, things like that. And he's amazing at really making sure everything's to spec, everything is using the appropriate design language system. So yeah, visual designers. And then obviously we have just a few engineers at Google. I think the ratio is 30, just a few. I think the ratio is 30 engineers to 1 designer. So as you can imagine, you are constantly working with engineers, and it's really amazing to think about, I have this idea and you work with this engineer and they really help you bring it to life. And they're so great at, really making sure that it's feasible and, everything we're building is in the right timeline. So work obviously a lot with engineers. Oh, and then last I'll say is product managers. Can't forget product managers. They really help drive strategy work. They help us focus on, where the product should be going. Are we aligning to like the stakeholders' needs? And I would say my role probably works closely with the product manager, and we think about kind of what makes most sense to really work on. And right now it's exciting. I love the end of the year because we get to focus on like, what does the next year look like? Thinking about all the kind of strategy work that we want to do. What did we not accomplish this year that we want to accomplish next year? So I think that really comes down to product and design. Of course, with engineering to make sure that everything's feasible, but the kind of really high level strategy stuff comes from product managers. And I've worked with some of those brilliant product managers that really like shape the way Google products are being used.
Google listens so much to its users, which turned out to be critically helpful during the COVID-19 pandemic. The company's pivotal action and nimble direction really helped millions of people around the world reach the audiences when we were so close to each other, yet so far apart due to social distancing measures.
For better or for worse, Google will change the strategy and change the organizations and move things around like at the drop of a hat if they need to. So, and obviously it can impact people that are working on the ground and people that are on teams. But we have different, reorgs and different structures. And I feel like they happen kind of quite often, I would say. And it can be obviously hard if you're working on something and then, you have to shift and work on something else. But that also has made me understand that that's because Google's like, you know what, we're starting to go in this direction and it's not actually where we want to go. And yes, it's going to be a pain, but we're going to move to the right direction because that's the right thing to do. So I think that, again, for better or for worse, I try and believe in like we're doing the best thing for our users and we're trying to make the right decisions. But I think I'm happy to see that there's at a place like Google where they are happy to say, you know what, we were wrong, and that's not actually what we want to build, and we're not going in the right direction. So we're actually going to shift gears and go over here, even though it's a pain, versus just being like, you know what, it's too hard to like tell everyone that they have to now change the direction of what they're working on. People are going to be upset. We're just going to keep building the wrong thing. And I'm like, that nobody wants to be a part of that, even though you can say, yay, I finished my project. So I think, I don't know, that would probably be the thing that I was kind of surprised by the most, is that they are happy to switch it up pretty often, which can be intense and frustrating, but you got to go with the flow. Yeah.
The design process at Google can be quite different depending on the project, the people, and the tasks you are equipped to handle during your day.
Basically, every quarter you have your planning and you work very closely with your team. And me being the design lead now versus when I started 3 years ago was much more, I wasn't as involved in the planning of what we were actually going to work on. So it was more of like, what do you need me to do? Where can I help? And how can I, make sure we meet our goals and our deadlines? But now being, understanding a bit more, I'm able to see a little bit of, I like to say it's like above the water, right? Like my head was always slightly underneath the surface and then it was peaking, and now I'm definitely above the water, and I'm able to kind of see this team's working on this and this team's working on that. And like, this is how it all comes together. And my question is always like, what are we trying to do? Like, what's our goal? What's our vision? I think coming from an agency background, I've been very vision focused, and I really need a North Star. I need a very clear North Star, or I can't drive the ship that you're asking me to drive. So that has always kind of been what I've been, wanting to understand. And so then, each quarter in a year, we try and tackle goals that meet that kind of North Star for that year. And so the beginning of a quarter, you kind of the designers work with the product managers to understand, okay, what are our objectives this quarter? What are we going to try and tackle? How are we going to do so? And then obviously you work closely with engineers to ensure that this is something they can support, that they agree with this. I would say that the kind of three trio, the best situation is where you have a product manager, a designer, and engineer, and they usually try and partner us in that way. So you're working in a very tight unit. And then, you go into hitting on those objectives. So I will start by doing sometimes a few different things. I could do foundational research to understand more about what I want to be designing in that space. I feel like at this point, I'm pretty well privy to what the market is and what the user needs are and stuff like that. So I will do actually like an assumption kind of list. And so I'll basically write out all my assumptions, all the questions I have, and then sometimes try and designing and just kind of like throwing something out there and seeing how users will respond to it, and then testing those assumptions, right? So I have an assumption that if, I'm going to design this thing, the user will then result in doing it this way. And then I test that. And then if that's true, then that's great. We can kind of move forward. But if not, then, I want to go back to the drawing board. And so with me, I've been focusing more on desktop search. So I am the design lead for the search experience for merchant. But, I work very closely with my counterpart, who is the lead for the Google Maps experience. So we want to obviously make sure that everything we're doing has the same thinking behind it. We're spread across London and California, so the time zones can be tricky. But if we do, for example, we're doing a content strategy workshop right now, we want to make sure that we're spending time every week translating the thinking and the knowledge back to the team in California, and then they're working on their own goals. So I think and the thing I struggle with sometimes the most is the amount of meetings that you have, because like I said, you have so many people that you work with across so many different time zones. And it's amazing to be able to lean on them and learn from them. But that means you have to spend time out of your day listening, absorbing, talking, sharing knowledge. And then all of a sudden it's 6 o'clock and you're like, well, I haven't even started the design thing I need to do today. And so I definitely struggle with being present in all the meetings, sharing the knowledge, and then also executing on the designs. But ideally I would, then keep going through my design process, testing those. We do a lot of research. So making sure that we're doing at least 1 to 2 studies a quarter, planning that out with our researcher. And then it's not really a waterfall experience. We have to work very closely with our engineers. and make sure that they are building what we were designing. And the engineers are so brilliant that they will come back and ask questions. Why did you make this decision? And I'm now learning that I have to basically have a deck that's like, these are all the research studies and all the answers that we have. And this is exactly, I literally did this last week. They're like, I don't agree with this. Like, why are we talking about it in this way? Or why are we, and I'm just like, well, this is literally the entire deck I did 6 months ago that proves that that's the reason why I made those design decisions. And it goes back to me loving that I can do that. And I squashed the conversation right there. And it's not a biased thing. It's not, it's really just focused in the data, and everyone cares about the data. So working really closely with your engineers at the end of the day to make sure that, you're building the right thing, and they're asking amazing questions. They're thinking of edge cases. I jump on calls with them and they're like, hey, and they're very proactive too. Like engineers I've worked with don't just sit around and wait for your answer. They will go off and build it and be like, hey, I built it this way and I built it that way. Which way do you think works better? And you're just like, so they definitely keep you on your toes. And I would say I work with them more near the end of my kind of ideation phase, but they're very involved in the entire process.
Design systems are such a critical element in today's design industry. Google uses Figma and FigJam to handle their design systems and equips its teams with an extensive documentation library of guidelines to follow.
There are so many different design systems within Google, and it takes time to really understand, where you need to be designing for which surface. Great news is Google is incredible at documentation. Like you said, we have an entire internal system that you can go to where you can see basically a Carbon website that explains, you can search button and it shows you an entire section about buttons, how to use them, where to use them, the different ways in which you use them, like all these different in-product examples. It gives you source code, it gives you a link to the design Figma file, like it's awesome. And so when I came to the London team, it was something that we were currently working on because our product was basically the first and possibly only product that had to sit on 3 different design systems. Like we literally had a chart on our wall that was like, okay, I'm designing for this page, and you'd go and you'd be like, all right, so it's on search, but it's in a dialogue, but it's, and you had to basically go through this flow chart to figure out what button to use. And because, with us, you have one design system for Google search. So if you're on the search page, your buttons need to look a certain way, your typography is a certain way. And then our product is actually in a dialogue experience sitting on top of Google search. So that is another design system, and that means there's different buttons, different rules, different styles. And then you have Google Maps, and that's the third design system. So you have 3 different design systems, and every team, we have like feature teams that we work with. So a feature team would be like the services team who's designing the services experience within Google My Business, and they would come to us and they'd be like, they would be like, here's my flow, can you help us understand if we're using the right components? And that was like a lot of what my job was in the beginning and I kind of just carved this out for myself with a few other designers because there was no one really doing this. We didn't have a merchant design system framework. And we worked with this incredible UX engineer who loves this stuff. And it was like me and him and 2 other guys and 2 other designers. And the 4 of us really kind of became this design system team, but really scrappy. I was just basically putting together based on the fact that I would find, references and different guidelines over here and different guidelines over there. And then I'd be like, okay, well then I think, this is what the button needs to look like. This is what the typography we should be using. But then to your point, there was a lot of times where we didn't have components designed. And then I would basically design them. And I would have to go through an entire approval process with not only my stakeholder leads, but then the leads from search and the leads from maps, because we'd want to design for both. And I'm talking about, I designed an entire banner system. So we have an alert banner, we have an info banner, we have a warning banner, and then we had contextual messages. And so you had to think based on the different use cases. For something like business information is a really, really complex part of the product, and we have to communicate so much at so many different levels that we didn't actually have all of the right components to communicate all the different things based on product requirements. So I'd be like, all right, well, we need a banner to communicate this at a high level. We need a context to communicate this at a lower level. We need an icon to, there's just so many different things. And I basically, with the help of the other designers on the team, would create these components coming out of the use cases from the feature teams. They'd be like, we've been through your documentation. We don't see a component that's going to fit our need. Can you help us create a new one? And then we go through the approval process on that. And that's really how our design system's grown. And now it's amazing. We have like a dark version, we have a light version. You can literally plug and play, like you can use them prototyping. Like we've built it out so well. And I'm really proud of that because I've never done that anywhere before. And it really came from just the fact that it needed to be done. We weren't like, there was not a design system team for the merchant experience. There was one for Google Maps, and we worked closely with that team, and there was one for search, but we just became this scrappy team that kind of built out our own library. And it's awesome because now I also know the components super well, so I can just design quite quickly.
While our third season on this podcast is primarily focused on the world of outer space and the connection of engineering, science, technology, and design, the Google Maps experience is a testament to all these categories directly being combined as well. From taking photos of our planet in a state-of-the-art Google Street View product, to seeing satellite imagery captured from outer space, to the interactions with cultures and people from all over the world to better understand humanity, even in the far corners of the world. Google really has shaped a world of stronger connectivity through one of the most powerful navigation apps out there. When people come together to make the world a better and more discoverable place, magic truly does happen. Join us for next week's episode as we meet Dan Goods, a creative problem solver who's made it his life's mission to help scientists think through their thinking at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. If you'd like to support the show or to learn more about Design Atlas, please visit our website, designatlaspod.com. To get in touch with us, DM us on Instagram or tweet us at designatlaspod. Or send us an email at hello@designatlaspod.com. You can also join the Design Atlas Slack community to connect with our show guests and get behind-the-scenes content and the latest design resources. Link is in the show notes. Finally, don't forget to subscribe to the show so you don't miss out on the next episodes. We would really appreciate if you could give us an honest review about the show. Thanks again for listening to Design Atlas.